In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to set a breakpoint and step through code in Visual Studio.net. No matter how good of an application developer you are, chances are you're not going to write all your code correctly the very first time you try. And so what you need at your disposal is a set of tools that allow you to diagnose the problems that you have in your application as you're unit testing them. And Visual Studio.net gives you just that. In fact, the same tools that are used to diagnose and debug problems with Windows applications or WinForms and components can also be used for web form applications. So if you have come from the InterDev era where you could do some of that, or where you had a response.write out in your web pages, some helper code that would tell you whether certain lines of code got executed or not. Those days hopefully are far past us. We won't have to do that anymore. Instead, we have a very fully interactive environment to debug our web applications as well. And so that's what I've set out to do right here. We have a web form application that basically allows us to type numbers in, and then it'll spit out a little message over here. It's a very simple application, but it'll help us exercise the capabilities of Visual Studio.net to walk through the code that's in the code behind of our web form. So one of the first things that we need to learn how to do is actually set a breakpoint. Now, a breakpoint is an instruction to the debugging engine that we want to basically stop the execution of the code at a certain spot, and that'll give us the ability to actually step through each line of code individually. So what I can do to set a breakpoint is I can do it one of two ways. The first way is to put my mouse cursor on a certain line and then go to the debug window and select new breakpoint, or I can hit Control B, as you see here. When I do that, the new breakpoint dialog opens up. Now, I want to table this discussion of the new breakpoint dialog to a future video. This allows you fine-grained control over setting your breakpoints, but it's not necessarily the most simple way to set a breakpoint in your application. So for right now, I'm just going to hit the cancel button. The other most simple way to set a breakpoint is either to select F9 from the keyboard, or to select this little area here on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, and as I clicked in this grayish area, you'll notice that a line was added and that a dot. And this lets us visually know that we have a breakpoint set there. In fact, we can set as many breakpoints throughout our application as we want to. And this allows us to maybe walk through a few lines of code and then stop it later on, stop the execution later on within the application. So to get rid of this, all I got to do is select the dot again and it goes away, and select the dot again and it goes away. So we'll just set one breakpoint for now. I'll also in a few moments show you how to get rid of or disable our breakpoints as we need to. But before we just start into stepping into the code, one other thing I want to show you is we save our application, and if I close the solution and then reopen the solution, let me close that, select recent projects, debug, you'll notice that our breakpoint is saved with the code. Now that's something in Visual Basic 6 and previously you didn't have the ability to do, to save the breakpoint, but in Visual Studio.net you have that ability. So that's pretty neat, I think. So let's go on and execute the application, and then when it gets to this line of code, we'll note how the application stops. To start the application, I'm going to select the Start icon from the toolbar, and after a moment or two, our application will pop up in a web browser, and you can see we have our web form. So I'm going to type in a 3, and then I'm going to type in a 5, and I'm going to hit our button. And when I do, notice that the browser went behind the actual Visual Studio environment, and that in place of our red line of code, we now have a yellow line of code. The yellow line of code lets us know that this is the current line of execution. It has not been executed yet, but instead will be executed once we go past this line, one step, as we walk through the code. Let me move the window up just a little bit so you can see some of the things that have appeared now within Visual Studio that allow us to better understand what's going on within our application. You can see that there's a series of tabs that appear at the bottom. There's a locals window, a command window, a this window, a breakpoints window, an output window, a task list, and a call stack. We have a ton of windows here at the bottom, and we're going to spend one video on each of these tabs in the future. But we might point out a few things here and there in this video as we go along. First of all, let's step through the code. You can see that I have not yet done anything. What we'll do is highlight on our lines of code the step into, the step over, and the step out. The step into is the equivalent of using the F11 button on the keyboard, and when I do that, it just goes to the next line of code. As you can see, it jumped from here, it avoided the catch statement and went to the end try, and we'll select the step into one more time. It goes to the try, and so we're just stepping through it one line at a time. It's pretty neat. So now, if I want to find out what values, say for example, that we have in some of our variables, since that's really meaningful to us, we want to know what state our application is in at this point. For example, what is the value of J? What I can do is simply hover my mouse cursor over J, and you can see there pops up a little box with J equals 5. So that's the value that we typed into our web form, and it was assigned to the variable J. I can also do this for other values and find out, for example, this function. It just gives me the declaration of that function that's found later on within my application. So just by hovering my mouse cursor over, I can see the values or the declarations of different values within my code behind. So I'm going to continue to step into, I'm just going to push the button a number of times. This was a call to the getValue function. You'll notice that we jumped all the way down into this function, and if it's going to go 500 times for k equals 1 to 500, you might say to yourself, well, window, which we'll talk about in a future video, or we'll just hit close right now. But that's a very valuable resource. The next thing that I want to demonstrate is how to basically add a pseudo breakpoint to your code during the debugging process. You can try to do that by clicking here, and that's one approach to adding a breakpoint at runtime. The other way is to just set your mouse cursor into one line of code and then right-click and select Run the Cursor. So the application will continue to run until, in this case, I equals J, and then it popped into here. So we didn't have to run through this like 10, 20, 50 times. It eventually just kind of works and to where we get the line of execution code on the line that we had our mouse cursor on. Also, now that we've had this pause for quite some time, have you noticed that we have just never decided to end the execution of our code, that we've just kind of left our application hanging out there? You can kind of keep your application from continuing to execute indefinitely, I guess. There should be no limitation to this, so you can work for literally hours or days without actually continuing the execution of the code. So if you need to go to lunch or something in the middle of debugging, don't worry about it. Just leave the code execution where it's at, and when you get back, it should be ready to continue on. Just a few more points, and we'll conclude this video. First of all, I want you to also note that we've set a number of breakpoints, and we'll talk about the breakpoints window in a future video. However, there is a breakpoints little dialog here that allows us to look at all the breakpoints that have been defined for our application. In this case, we have very simple breakpoints defined. We just did it manually by clicking over here in this left-hand column, and therefore a lot of the conditions, the hit count, those things have not been set for us. We can see how many times a specific, in this case, this breakpoint has been hit currently one time. And so that's kind of an interesting feature. You can see how many times a certain breakpoint's been hit. But we can also manage this, and again, we'll display, we'll talk about that in a future video. Just wanted to bring it to your attention that it's here and that you can actually turn on and off breakpoints using this mechanism. Notice that when I do that, the breakpoint loses its solid color and instead just has an outline, and this lets us know that the breakpoint has been disabled. So I'm going to enable all the breakpoints this way. Another way to disable the breakpoints is to just right-click on the breakpoint and select Disable Breakpoint, or you can go to the debug window and select Disable All Breakpoints, and you'll notice all the checkboxes go away, and all my breakpoints now are just outlines. Or I can select Enable All Breakpoints, and all the breakpoints come right back. And so this is important if you don't feel like getting rid of all the important breakpoints that you have throughout your code, but you don't want to hit on those breakpoints every single time that you go to execute your code. Say you want to test something else in the application now, but you don't want your other 10 or 15 or 20 breakpoints to stop the execution until you get to that point. Well, you can just leave them in there and just disable them temporarily, and there's no problem with doing that. And the next thing that I want to show you is the ability to clear all the breakpoints by selecting Control-Shift and F9, or just selecting this from the debug window, the Clear All Breakpoints menu option. And when you do, all the breakpoints disappear from the breakpoint window, and you can see all of our breakpoints that were defined here are gone. And this is a convenient way to just get rid of all your breakpoints in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, if you take this approach, they're gone for good, and you have to manually define them again in order to get them back, as I just did right there. Or you can take another tact, and let me do this. I'm going to continue the execution of this page and then rerun our example. To continue the execution, I can just select the Continue button from my debug toolbar, or I can select the F5 from my keyboard. But I'm going to select Go ahead and Continue, and when I do, the application does continue. It prints out, found it in this window. So we finally finished executing, and I'm going to hit the close for my web browser, and that will kick us out of debug mode. And now, say the next time that I run the application to test it, I don't want to hit the breakpoints. Yeah, I could clear all the breakpoints. I could disable all the breakpoints. We've already talked about that. Or I can select from the uh, debug menu, start without debugging. That's Control F5. When I do, it will never hit any of the breakpoints that I've defined within my application. So I'm going to select 2 and then 6 and hit the button, and notice that it didn't hit the breakpoint that I defined. So that's another way to just skip over all the breakpoints. But you have a lot of options there, and whatever you're familiar and comfortable with, you can take those approaches. So there's a lot more to talk about in debugging. This was just the very fundamental basics of how to set a breakpoint, how to step through your code using the step into, step over, and step out of toolbar buttons and keyboard shortcuts. We talked about managing your breakpoints using the breakpoint window, how to use a quick watch, or how to just obtain a value by hovering your mouse cursor over a certain variable, and then how to start your application without debugging it, or how to continue on while you're debugging to hit multiple breakpoints or just continue the flow of execution. So we talked about a lot of things in this video. I hope that it was very beneficial to you and that you will employ this tool often as you go out to develop your applications, even and especially your web form applications. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video.